Okay, we're testing now. So say something so we can test it.
Well, you surprised me so I can't think of anything right now.
Okay, what's the square root of 4?
I don't know. 2, I guess.
The 2. Okay, well that's good. Yeah, you're doing just fine. Okay, now we're going to play this. Well, let's record a little bit more there, so I can practice my zooming.
Are you not taking my picture all this time, are you?
Yeah, I am. I'm taking your picture now.
Oh, you little rascal, you.
This is a test, so we're going to see if the sound comes through good so we can understand what it says.
Oh, well, okay. What are we going to do now?
We'll turn it off now.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's recording.
Well, I thought you were going to ask me something.
Yep. So, I see, this is an interview with Francis Fisher about family history. So,
give it a date.
Yeah, it's August the
8th. 6th.
6th. I think it's August 6th, 2002. So, your mother was Jennie Belle Ludwig. What do you remember about her father and mother, Henry Wiley Ludwig and Mary Catherine Weinkauf?
Well, of course, I never did see either one of them. They were dead by the time I was born. All I know is what I heard other people say, that my grandmother was a Weinkauf, and all the Weinkaufs, they come from very good disposition people, very kind, but smart. And they lived on a farm. They had several farms. They had a whole lot of land that they rented, I suppose, rented out to tenants. Even though they have their own, they'd have their own garden and own chickens and pigs and cattle and all that. Everybody had that themselves, you know. But of course back then we didn't have ice, so you had to dry things. Some people had what they call some kind of cellar. I don't know what it is, but anyway, it would be dug out in the ground, and it would be cool where you could keep some things sometimes. But for the winter, they had to depend on dried beans and things of that kind, and can them in glass jars. And of course you had to cook it first. They didn't have pressure cookers back then at all. So you just got it all prepared in a big pot and cooked it so long, and then you boiled your jars out to be sure there weren't any germs in there, and put them in fruit jars.
What do you think they grew on their farm? They had animals?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they grew all kind of animals and killed. In the wintertime when it was real cold was when they, especially the pigs, and they would make everything out of the pig organs and so forth. You had what they call liver mush, and the heart, and the, let's see, there's other dishes that but they used everything except the entrails of the pig. Some people, even the feet were their favorite food. It was all, you know, not gristle, but
cartilage.
Cartilage, yeah. Mm-hmm. And of course they grew everything back then in the garden, you know, all kind of beans and corn, and of course it wasn't good like our Silver Queen is today. But even grew their own popcorn and things like that for the winter, you know, when they were closed in. Yeah, you had to go to bed kind of early because all you had was oil lamps or candles and things like that for light. There weren't any electricity back in their day.
You think what they grow for money? Was it tobacco or cotton?
I really don't know, unless it would be wheat and corn It never raised any tobacco around here at all. Of course, they didn't anybody raise it that then, I don't guess. Let's see.
Well, I remember visiting the Ludwig homestead when I was little, near Concord. That's what they called the home, the old home place. The farmhouse still had a log cabin under the boards. What do you remember about the farm?
I don't remember a thing about the farm as far as that goes, but I knew they had a whole farm connected to theirs, and they had a home on it that they rented out to tenants. And of course they'd get a certain percent of the crops. I don't know exactly how that was divided, but they always made, you know, hay and all that, and baled it up to feed the cattle in the winter time. And
Henry Wiley Ludwig, your grandfather's great-grandfather was Adolphus Nussman, the first Lutheran minister in North Carolina. What church did he come here to serve?
The St. John's Lutheran Church. It's out on Route 73 between, I'd say, 2 miles this side of Mount Pleasant. And they have a monument, a huge monument, all about him being the first Lutheran minister, and he brought some of the first Lutheran, I guess you'd call them teachers, I'm not right sure, but there's some of those on that monument. It's quite a history. Well, the whole history of that is at St. John's Lutheran Church out there in the country. That was one of the first Lutheran churches around here, and their neighbor Lutheran churches. I think there were 3 of them three Lutheran churches out in there that he served. Mm-hmm. And of course he went by horseback to the different churches. That's about all I know about it. Now, I've been told by somebody that knows that it would be 6 greats before mine. So that's wrong what you said about Grandpa. 6 greats would be our generation now from Nussman.
Jennie Belle Ludwig went to college back in the 1890s. How unusual was that?
That was very unusual. I don't know whether they even called it college or not. But the Southern Bells, it was to teach them. But anyway, you had to be pretty outstanding and so forth to go to college there. And during my mother's generation, a lot of her friends and student friends lived around here. I remember she had one special one that lived in Landis, and several of them in Concord that were her student sisters while she was in, it was called Mount Pleasant Seminary, I believe, I'm not sure. Yeah. But they had, I think, 2 big brick buildings, which by my time, they both had been destroyed, and in another part of Mount Pleasant, there was another school. Now, I'm not right sure about it, because I believe before that was torn down, it's when Belle, my older sister, Belle went there. And whether it was called college or not, or how many grades she went to common school here before then, I just don't know. But I know that the Rhine School is where we all went. At that time, I think it just went to the 10th grade, and I'm not sure about that. But
well, so Jennie Belle Ludwig went to the Montemina Seminary in Mount Pleasant.
And I suppose it was the same name by the time Belle got there, but I'm not right sure about that.
Now, wasn't that a Lutheran school? I drove over to Mount Pleasant and read the history on the history marker, and it sounded to me like it was a Lutheran school, so I just wondered if our family had a connection with it.
Well, I don't really know, but I wouldn't doubt it a bit because Mother was grown up. She grew up in Trinity Lutheran School there close to her home out in the country. And to this day, it's a very good church. Did I say school? I meant church. Yeah. Well, at that time, I'm not sure, but I think that she went to parochial school enough to go to that one. And let's see, I don't know where it was located. But she boarded with the preacher because it was too far for her to go every day, and it probably didn't last but maybe 6 months. I'm not sure about that.
But a parochial school, that would have been a Lutheran parochial school.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. But now about the Mount Pleasant, I'm not right sure about that. I never thought about that, but I suppose it was Lutheran.
Yeah, I think so. Do you know what she studied at the Monument?
I have no idea, but I remember reading the account of their wedding at Darsanne. She had the paper clipping of it, and they called her a Southern Belle.
Yeah, Jennie Belle Ludwig was the only child in her family, so she inherited all her parents' land. How important was that to your family?
Well, very important, because it was several different farms, and they would rent it out to tenants, and of course that was their income. But then later on, during the Depression, when all we had was farmland, and the school tax, the tax on the land was what ran the schools back then. So that meant that my family had to pay extra lot of tax to run the schools, you see. Let's see.
Well, that land was also used by Bascom Leonard later as income, and he would sell off some land and all.
He had a whole lot of farms of his own he bought himself. I know 3 or 4 maybe. But when the Depression came along, and see, they were responsible for all those tenants and everything, and Ken can tell you how much the cotton and all that was, which you just couldn't, it was ridiculous. And everybody, the thing of it is, during that Depression, everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was in the same boat. It didn't make it like it is today, you know, where they're real rich and all that, you know.
What are some of the qualities you remember about your mother that were special?
My mother?
Yep.
She was a hard-working, smart woman that she sewed. She had 7 girls, and she did all the sewing for them, even made our little underwears back in then. And the men's shirts, just a few of them, most of it was bought, but she had made some shirts too. But now she was known as a dresser. Friends, when I came back to live from Iowa, and I started going to St. James Lutheran Church in Concord, there were a lot of people there that had known my folks in the past. And there was one woman in particular. I remember she worked at the Register of Deeds, and she said when my father would bring her down there maybe to sign something or something like that, said you knew she was there. Now she described, you know, how she was dressed and everything. She knew she was a Southern Belle, and I've had other people to tell me about she was really a dresser. Of course, she made all those clothes herself.
Well, what about her disposition?
Well, her disposition was wonderful, and my sister Ruth got her disposition. My mother always said that Ruth had the best disposition of all of us. Well, I don't know whether we ever said, but I don't remember when my granddaddy was born, but I know Mama was born in 1876. Well, I'd say about 20 years ago, I met somebody that was the present organist at Trinity Lutheran Church, which is the church Mother grew up in. And evidently she had kind of looked back at the history of the church and so forth, and she told me at that time that my mother was the organist at that church. Now how long it was, I don't know, but I'm sure she helped out with the music all along. What was the next thing?
Well, you tell about the organ.
Now I'm not right sure. They call it the organist, but I expect it was one of those organs back then that most people, instead of piano, they had an organ. It was one that was, you pumped it while you were playing it. That was the power. Now, if it was a bigger one in the church, somebody could be pumping that up in the attic or something like that. I just don't know. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't a piano back then.
Well, you said that you had an organ like that at
Yeah,
Grandpa's house.
Yeah, most homes, like today, if they would have a piano, instead of a piano, then they'd have an organ. And it was one of those that you pumped as you played, with your feet, Oh, I never did say that before, did I? Yeah, you pumped it with your feet while you were playing the piano, and that was the power that was making it sound, you know. And most everybody had one in there. No, they didn't either. Anybody that would have had a piano today, they would have had an organ back then. Well, when they moved from the old home place up to where I was born, I think they took 2 years to build this house, and Roy was the baby when they moved in. I think he was 9 months old, and I forgot what I was telling.
Oh, I haven't heard this part before, but we'll get to this later on.
I know what I was in the middle
Oh,
of
something about the organ, I guess.
Oh, yeah. So when they moved, of course they moved the organ, even though we had a piano all my life. In fact, we had a baby grand. I think maybe I was 5 years old when they bought that, the baby grand. But we always had that organ, not in the parlor or anything, but maybe upstairs somewhere in the playroom or something like that. But finally, they traded in a lot of these old antiques for modern furniture, and of course we got rid of a lot of valuable things back then, but they'd be valuable now, but how in the world can you keep all that stuff all those years? We used to play with it, you know. You pumped it with your feet while you were playing, and but it went with the antiques when we traded for modern furniture and all that.
Thank you. Now we're going to start talking about your father, Bascom Leonard Umberger, known as B.L. Umberger.
Mm-hmm.
And he had around 16 brothers, sisters, half-brothers, and half-sisters.
Three sets.
Yeah, 3 sets. So how come there were so many of them?
Well, I don't know how come there were so many of them, but there were 3 sets. His mother was married to her husband, and they had, I don't know how many children, but anyway, then at that time his father was married to somebody else, and I don't know those names. But then their mates died, and these mates, one was a king. See, the granddaddy must have been the Umberger. That's where the Umberger name came from. But the other side was king.
So his father is Colonel Abraham Umberger?
My grandfather.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. My grandfather, my father's father, was a colonel in the
Southern Army? Confederate Army?
Yeah, I don't know really what it is, but it's way back then. But every family had a lot of children then, but they never all of them lived. every little thing would come along and take a lot of them, you know. And so that made it, when my grandfather married my grandmother, and then they had my father's family. I think there were 3 girls and 2 boys that lived. Now whether others had died, I just don't know. But see, that was at least 5 that already added to. But when we had all 3 sets, I think there were anywhere from 16 to 18 children from those. Let's see, it'd be 4 people. No, that's not right. I mean,
Well, yeah, there was a bunch. So
so many different generations there.
and he was born in Wytheville, Virginia.
Wytheville, Virginia. I think it's Wilkes County anyway, and we always called it Wytheville, but it was out in the country. And this is 2000, and the last time any of us went up there, that farmhouse is still there. White, everything was wood house land. You've had very few brick houses built back then. Today, it's too expensive to keep the painted on wood houses. So today our houses are anything but wood.
Well, when he was little, he had a leg infection.
Oh yeah.
And tell about that and how it affected his whole life.
Okay. When my father was anywhere around 5 years old, I don't know what, he fell on a rake that was on the ground and prongs up, and hurt a leg that crippled him all his life. But he kept going all the time during his lifetime. I think he had blood poison 3 different times back when one blood poison would kill you because we didn't have these antibiotics or anything like that. But he had a awful looking leg that would flare up at certain times. He'd been all over the country trying to find a doctor that would help him. He went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and that water's supposed to be real healing or something like that. And but anyway, I remember he had when it acted up, and for him to be able to sleep and cover up, there was a kind of a wire thing that he put over his leg to keep anything from touching it, you see. And but that leg just bothered him. But he had to be in the bed so much back when he was little, and he had his 3 sisters were very gifted. They were artists, and they knew how to do everything. So they taught him to tat and do things like that, and he learned to be a beautiful whistler, and he could mock any kind of bird you could think of, and he could just play solos on his whistling. It was beautiful.
Now, he graduated from Blacksburg College, now called Virginia Polytechnic Institute, in 1895. Do you know what he studied?
I have no idea what he studied, but I want to tell you why he was there. See, as I said, he had a very talented family. They were artists, and they knew how to do everything. And they taught him to tat and to do things like that. And because he was crippled, the family got together. They didn't send other people to college, but they thought since he was disabled like that, he better be the one of all the family that would go to college. And so that's when they sent him to college. But what he studied, I have no idea. But he was a good businessman. He had a real business head on him, and he established so many different companies of his to make a living. And
his first business was the home education company that he started while he was in college.
did he?
Yep. Because the harp is patented before he graduated from college, 1894, and he graduated in 1895.
Is this running?
Yeah. So can you tell how the home education company operated?
Well, it's been told to me and I'm pretty sure it's, but he had the home education company, and that meant that he had all kind of things that you could learn to educate yourself at home. They had games, they had musical instruments, they had books, they had, I can't think of all the different things, but any games, I guess I said that before, but when he had that company, he hired young men that were interested in going to college, especially if they were interested in being preachers, I remember. And well, anyway, he had all these different things. Back then you didn't have hotels and all motels, and he'd hire these young people to, I think even my brother Wiley went with him one time way up in Pennsylvania, and he had them all over the country. And when they just go, he'd have the sample, and I suppose when they got it, they'd probably come through the mail. But anyway, they'd go to these homes out in the country or whenever they landed at night, well, wherever they were in somebody's home and so forth, even if I think even they had to sleep in the barn, well, they'd stay there that night, you see, and start on back the next day. But anyway, I don't remember how many he probably helped to educate, college educate. But one interesting thing about that was I went to school at James Madison University at Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I'm trying to think of my president's name. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, I was in school, and we all had our own individual post office box, and in my box one day was a little note for me to see the president at such and such time. Well, Lord, hey, that was back during the Depression when we didn't have enough money for me to go into college, so I was always behind in college, so in money. So I just figured, boy, that's what it's for. I kind of hated to go. Well, anyway, the time came and I went, and there he was talking to me and asking all kind of questions. I couldn't imagine what in the world. Talking about my mother. She said my father was dead, and my mother lived in Concord, North Carolina, and all this, of course, was right. And then he said, and your dad had this business of home education company that he helped people go to college. He says, oh, I was one of them. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah. And he had made it to be the president of the college.
Yeah. Duke, Dr. Duke, that's what his name was.
What was B.L. Umberger's personality like?
Well, he was smart, and he really had a business head on him, but he had a temper. I shouldn't say here. I shouldn't say what I want to say. But he would flare up, and you better get out of the way, I'll tell you that. But he had raised a bunch of boys, and he really believed in keeping those boys busy, keeping them out of trouble. And we always had all kind of games at home. And he figured if we had games at home when people came in, we could enter, instead of us going to their house, he could keep us home that way. And I forgot what else I was going to tell. I started something else.
What's his personality like?
Oh, well, he was a good man. He was smart, and both my mother and father were really Lutherans, and they brought up a bunch of children on Sunday morning. We didn't say, are we going to do so-and-so? It was just understood everybody put their Sunday clothes on and went to church.
Was he always a businessman? To the end of his life, he was a businessman. That was how he earned his living all the time.
Yeah, yeah. He had several different companies. I can't remember. One of them was I can't remember exactly what. It was something about the fixtures company. That was back when they didn't even have stands to prop things on, you know, in the stores and all. He had all kind of types like that were made out of metal, and that's before all this modern stuff came. And I can't remember what else he had during that time.
Oh, that's right. He sold like these can openers. That was one of the old antique things.
Yeah.
Right.
That was back before we had those convenient ones that turned to open the cans. He had one made that is out of metal, and then it had a metal half ring fastened onto the handle that was sharp. So you got your can, and you put that on there, and you press down, and that opened the can, right like that. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things he had, but I can't remember all of the different stuff.
So he would buy patents, and then on inventions.
That's right. If somebody had invented something and made it and got a patent on it, if he thought that would sell, anything he thought would sell, then he'd buy the patent from them and have it made. And he had back then, you didn't have all these games like they got today, but he had what they call a politic game, and it was very educational. This probably was back in the educational company, I don't know, but it had the map of the United States and its possessions, and we had cards, and how many representatives they had, why that number would be on the cards. And you had to get books that joined each other. You give out the cards, and you had to get books, at least 4, that joined each other, and that made you a book, and you put them down, and you draw one every time you go around. And but see, on the cards, it had those numbers of representatives, and when you got through and you count, that's what you counted was the numbers on there, and whoever got the highest number, of course, won the game.
So this was teaching you about your American electoral system.
That's right. And not only that, when you got a book, we had pens. Some of them had pegs that you'd mark it off on the board, you know, so that you know that's already been bought, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, B.L. Umberger was from Withville, Virginia, and Jennie Belle was from Concord. How did he meet Jennie Belle?
Well, the way I understand it, Jennie Belle was going to parochial school at Enochville, but it was too far to go every day in the buggy for Grandpa to take her, so she boarded. As long as school was over, she boarded with the preacher, and I can't think of his name right now, but I think he was maybe a relative, I'm not sure. But I think my dad probably rode a bicycle down from Withville, something like that, I've heard the story, I think the preacher was a kind of a distant relative of my dad. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's where the connection came. So he'd come down to visit them and trying to find some business road out or something like that. And that's where, as far as I know, that's where he met my mother.
Okay. And they were married on November the 9th, 1899 at the Ludwig homestead. Do you know, did they live there then for a while?
I'm sure they always lived with my mother and father, and when they built the new house here at Concord, they moved with them. Now, I'm not right sure whether my grandmother was still living at that time, but I know my grandfather was.
So that new big house called Umberger Place between Concord and Kannapolis, they moved in about 1906. Was that built on the Ludwig property?
No, that was built on my dad's property that he had bought. But if you go way back to my what we call the home place, there was less than a mile between the two houses if you went straight back. Of course, there weren't any roads that. All the roads then were red mud and dry weather, dust wet everywhere.
So there was a mile between your grandmother's home, parents' home, and her new home,
place.
The new Ludwig place. Okay.
But that's the only two homes my mother ever lived in, was those two homes.
Mm-hmm. And they had 11 children together. Were they all born at home, either at the Ludwig homestead or at the Umberger place?
They were all born. We didn't even have a hospital in Concord at that time. In fact, we didn't have a hospital in Concord till maybe I was grown, almost. But all the children were born at home, and my mother never had a miscarriage. But at different times, she lost a little girl, Etta, when she was 4.5 years old. The kids were playing, and somebody struck a match to the fireplace, and the grown people were all in the back of the house working, and those kids were playing, and Etta got too close to that and caught her clothes on fire. Of course, they all went running back in the house, and I think there was somebody on the porch and somebody was in the kitchen. They rolled her over until they got it out, but it was pretty bad. And during the night, she died from the burns. And I'm pretty sure the doctor came and stayed with you back then, if something like that, or if you're having a baby and so forth. And then she lost another one. Edith was the baby, and she got her mastoiditis in her ear, and of course she had to go to Charlotte to the hospital, Presbyterian Hospital then, and they operated on it, but she got blood poison from the operation. And of course, you know, they know how to handle blood poison now, but they sure didn't then. And of course, her being just 4.5 years old, my mother, even though she had 10 kids at home, she stayed over at the hospital until she died from that blood poison.